Hello, dear friends. Before we dive into an exciting story, I'd like to ask you to do a couple of important things. 1. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with future exciting stories. 2nd, if you like our videos, be sure to give us a like. This will help us realize that you appreciate our hard work. And of course, feel free to leave a comment telling us which manhwa you'd like us to cover in the next video. Your opinion is important to us. So let's get started on our exciting journey. In a world where dungeons appeared and monsters were born, ordinary people found new gifts, transforming into hunters whose job it was to clear dungeons. Their merit and ability became defined by ranks reflecting achievement and skill level. Among them was Kang Hyun-joon, who began his journey as an F-ranked hunter. In this world where ranks held importance, low-ranked hunters were often seen as a burden, but the protagonist was used to it, for even he had a ray of light. The ray of light next to Kang Hyun-joon was his closest and dearest soulmate, Hai-jin. One clear day, they met at a cozy cafe. Kang Hyun-joon was really excited to see her after a long separation. Long workdays deprived them of seeing each other, and the girl remained dissatisfied because of it. At the meeting, she immediately expressed her displeasure, claiming that they have been dating for exactly 1 year. Of course, the guy did not forget about it and even prepared a gift. But she interrupted him, announcing that they were breaking up. The girl suddenly stood up from the table, starting to leave. Kang Hyun-joon tried to stop her, but her words were cold and adamant. She claimed that he stayed put and did not develop, whereas she was able to raise her rank from F rank to C rank for this year. Her anger and frustration were palpable, and she spared no words in calling him pathetic. Like lightning, she was gone, leaving only the instruction that he not call again. The guy was shocked by the current situation. The girl's words began to sound like an agonizing echo in his head. Talentless, incapable F-rank trash. He persistently believed that with careful work and dedication, he could prove that he was capable of more, that he could overcome his shortcomings and succeed. But in the end, in the eyes of those around him, he seemed to be nothing but an unimportant loser, unneeded by anyone and incapable of doing anything meaningful. After breaking up with his girlfriend, Kang Hyun-joon met his friend named Seok-gu in the park. He shared with him the difficult situation he was in. He looked for support, but even a friend, with a joking tone, tried to teach him, advising him to work harder. Seok-gu argued that only those who are persistent in pursuing their goals do well. During the conversation, the friend tried on comparisons, claiming that Kang Hyun-joon is just drinking soju while sitting by the Han River, and he's so poor that he can't even afford a snack. A friend decided to buy him something at a convenience store to support him. He also reminded us that the river is extremely cold and it's not even worth thinking about jumping in. His other advice was about feeling worthless compared to the full-fledged employees in the Hunters Association where Seok-gu worked. Even though it was said in jest, Kang Hyun-joon realized that his friend was right about something in this situation. He had always believed that everyone had at least one talent and that his own was simply undiscovered. Over the years, he believed he was bound to find his unique ability. Even if the hidden talent didn't manifest, he continued to persevere despite the uncertainty. He set goals and put forth effort, not always knowing if every step he took was worth it, or if it was worth raising the white flag of surrender. Suddenly, his musings were interrupted by a stranger who approached him. The man assumed that Kang Hyun-joon was an F-ranked hunter, but he noticed the potential in him that was expressed even in his gaze. The confused protagonist asked how the man had guessed his rank. Smiling, the stranger replied that it didn't matter, then continued the story. The man spoke of being able to sense the past lives of prominent people, and each of those lives was associated with prominent statuses. This unusual speech confused Kang Hyun-joon, but the stranger continued to claim that if the protagonist wanted to gain power, he would have no obstacles. He claimed that he was even now seeing those past lives next to Kang Hyun-joon. The protagonist could not understand how such strange ideas occupied the minds of fanatics, but the man told him that time would reveal the truth, and that was all he could tell him. The stranger then turned around and left. Right after that, Kang Hyun-joon was approached by his friend Seok-gu with drinks in his hands. However, the protagonist was in a trance and was scared of his friend. Seok-gu asked who the man was, and Kang Hyun-joon said he didn't know, then asked his friend if he believed in past lives. This caused confusion for the friend who couldn't understand what he was talking about. For the next few hours, they chatted. enjoying their drinks as the sun slowly set behind the horizon. Suddenly, Kang Hyun-joon began to hear an incomprehensible voice that told him about his 990,000 past lives and their observation of him. A little confused, he asked his friend if he had heard any strange sounds. Seokgu only recalled Kang Hyun-joon's whining, to which he agreed with a slight chuckle. To change the topic of conversation, the guy asked about a possible job in some squad that required porters. Seokgu wondered why his friend was suddenly interested in such a hard job. Kang Hyun-joon replied that he had to pay the rent for his apartment and that the orphanage where he used to live was in a difficult situation. Seokgu replied that there was a C-rank squad, but the people in it were not very friendly, but Kang Hyun-joon agreed because he really needed the money. After a few more drinks of alcohol, Seokgu had to support a drunken Kang Hyun-joon to get him home. Although Kang Hyun-joon didn't mind another drink, Seokgu was already annoyed. He felt that he had spent too much time on him to bring him home, especially since Kang Hyun-joon wanted to go to work as a porter tomorrow. At the moment of saying goodbye, Seokgu said that he would send him a text message about the start time. Kang Hyun-joon thanked his friend for his help. Seokgu jokingly replied that if he was so grateful, let him succeed and treat him to something delicious in the future. As he opened the door to the apartment, Kang Hyun-joon felt a deep sense of gratitude that he had only one true friend, but the best. But suddenly, as he opened the door, he was blinded by a bright white light. The next moment, he was in an unknown place. Behind him appeared an imposing man with a muscular figure, wearing a helmet and carrying a spear. A mixed feeling of fear and bewilderment swept over the protagonist. The warrior introduced himself as Karsago, the protector of the northern part of the kingdom, carrying the shield of justice. He informed Kang Hyun-joon that he was part of his past life. At that moment, the words of the stranger from the street came to mind. Believe it or not, you'll soon feel it for yourself. Now that Karsago had turned his attention to Kang Hyun-joon, he was able to instill his will into him even if his body was torn to pieces 1,000 times by his spear. In a panic, Kang Hyun-joon shouted that he didn't understand anything, but Karsago replied that even when facing death, he continued to tell untruths. Karsago hinted that if he was going to mix their fates with mud, he would do it in such a way that he would even wash his hands in his blood. Then he suddenly threw his lightning spear, which pierced Kang Hyun-joon, throwing him to all fours and crushing him in agony. As the pain dissected his body, the warrior continued to mock him, saying that he was squirming his face as a consequence of just one blow. At that moment, Kang Hyun-joon realized that his life force was leaving, and that he needed to get out of here immediately, or else death would be his final act. Karsago walked over and pulled the spear out of him, pronouncing that once again he was being tormented by unnecessary thoughts, and emphasizing that the fear of death was not worth such torment. When the warrior retrieved the spear, Kang Hyun-joon was astonished. It appeared unharmed, as if his body had regenerated itself. Here he could not die without Karsago's permission. Even if he wanted death, it would elude him. So the thought arose that he might be tortured here indefinitely, for he was immortal. Immediately, he noticed the door that had been there since he had arrived. He rushed toward it, realizing that she was an opportunity to leave. The warrior stayed behind, looking in his direction, uttered that he was running again, for he lacked the strength to defend himself, and Kang Hyun-joon didn't even have the courage to face his fate. Karsago expressed regret, saying that the one who lost his love and honor, the one who is leaving, can't be his vessel since Kang Hyun-joon is unable to command his respect. Those words made Kang Hyun-joon falter. He replied that Karsago didn't know much about him. He may not have had any bright talents or skills, but there was always the hope that things would change through suffering. He emphasized that for those who are deprived of the power of redemption, suffering remains only an empty suffering. No matter how badly he feels, he will not allow himself to retreat. Kang Hyun-joon's anger was violent. Karsago didn't understand what it felt like to be powerless. The protagonist's eyes flashed with anger, and he sharply retorted that the warrior knew nothing about him, and how could he dare to speak like that? For the first time, Karsago saw the explosion of emotion in the hero's eyes. Then he realized that his time had come, as in his previous life, to hand over his strength and will to Kang Hyun-joon. This was necessary so that no one else could take anything away from him so that he could get to the top. Around them, white silhouettes of Kang Hyun-joon's past lives suddenly began to appear. These ghostly images congratulated him and said that they were willing to help him on his journey. However, it was impossible for Kang Hyun-joon to achieve results without trials and difficulties. If he sought to gain the power to change his destiny, he had to raise his shield and take the path of battle against Karsago. However, he remained wary of the warrior. Kang Hyun-joon wasn't even sure if Karsago really represented his past life. Nevertheless, if it would help him gain strength, he was willing to give it a try. It didn't matter to Karsago how deeply Kang Hyun-joon trusted him. What mattered was that Kang Hyun-joon was the reincarnation of their fateful bond. Kang Hyun-joon could only use one technique to repel Karsago's attack, but after the warrior's crushing blow pierced his body, he didn't even have time to see the warrior swing his spear. Karsago insisted that he get up and continue fighting, not letting his mind become clouded due to only a few attacks. However, Kang Hyun-joon's fighting spirit began to fade. He realized that he was beginning to lose his mind. After many attempts to fight Karsago, the boy seemed to be on the verge of death. He tried hard to fend off the attacks, but the spear stabbed him again and again, over and over again, hundreds of times. After 2,500 piercings, he was still unable to fully wield his shield. The warrior kept advancing, shouting that he would kill him. When Kang Hyun-joon managed to block the blow for the first time, he felt fear. It was still hard for him to get used to the feeling of being pierced. However, what he was able to get used to after countless encounters with death was the possibility of dying. After successfully blocking the attack, Karsago's job was over. He used 24 basic spear techniques and the ability to understand the enemy's attacks. These actions were so natural that Kang Hyun-joon's body would remember them by itself. When you awaken from this dream, much in your life will change. Karsago's last words, drowned in the darkness, sounded like this. He was brought back to reality by the ringing of the phone. Sek-gu called, inquiring about his business. His friend had also sent the address and information about the robot, which he needed to study before the meeting. Kang Hyun-joon thanked him and started to get out of bed, getting ready. One thought was concentrating in his mind, the dream he had seen. He was pierced by a spear without a break, and that was Karsago's past life. There were no wounds on his body, but he still felt pain. It was so realistic that it was hard to call it just a dream. As he left the apartment, he came across a shield he had gotten by registering as a hunter that he hadn't seen in a while. Remembering Karsago's words where he suggested to raise his shield and stand up to fight, he resolutely took it with him. Kang Hyun-joon then headed to work. It only took 10 minutes. He came to the entrance of the C-rank dungeon. There he spotted his ex-girlfriend who thought he was following her. Next to her was a guy named Sang-chul. He aggressively approached Kang Hyun-joon and asked why he was carrying that heavy shield and how he was going to carry mana crystals while carrying it around. Kang Hyun-joon didn't like it. Inwardly, he called the guy a miserable bastard. Suddenly, the past life Hasashin Shadow Master who saw the evil inside Kang Hyun-joon and sent him congratulations, pointing out that an impenetrable darkness was growing in his soul. Kang Hyun-joon politely apologized to Sang-chul Appa and explained that this was his first experience as a porter. After that, the group gathered at the entrance of the dungeon, and Sang-chul offered to go first, starting to open the door. But Kang Hyun-joon felt that something was wrong, just like in the dream when he was pierced by the spear. This feeling was less intense, but he clearly felt the urge to kill. As soon as they opened the door to the dungeon, a spear suddenly rushed at them at a terrifying speed. Everyone managed to dodge except for Kang Hyun-joon, who was the one it was aimed at. But Karsago, the shield of justice, sprang into action, protecting him. As long as Karsago was guarding, no attack could harm him, and he instantly repelled the attack with his shield. As soon as they recovered from this attack, skeleton knights started appearing out of nowhere and began attacking the group. They fought persistently, using all their strength to repel this attack. After the battle, the group was resting near the exit of the dungeon. Sang-chul was confused about the skeleton knights attacking them, as such creatures were only supposed to be found in B-rank dungeons. Part of their team had suffered casualties in this battle. Hai-jin speculated that it could have been a mistake by the dungeon administration. Sometimes that happens. This dungeon was probably more dangerous than standard C-rank missions, and Kang Hyun-joon was able to dodge the attack by a miracle. Nevertheless, further trekking with this team composition was impossible. Everyone realized that Hai-jin was right, and the decision to go back, even with possible punishment, seemed more reasonable than risking lives. Kang Hyun-joon realized that he had been saved by the mysterious voice, but there was no guarantee that this would happen again in the future. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. After they realized that the door was locked, Sang-chul expressed the only course of action. They had no choice but to continue cleaning the dungeon. They decided to move forward. As they walked a little further, they came to a cave illuminated by the soft light of blue crystals. However, one of the group members suddenly stopped everyone after hearing some sound, and suddenly he was attacked by a skeleton sergeant with a staggering blow. Hyejin was greatly frightened after realizing that they might die a senseless death here. It was at this moment that the skeleton headed towards Kang Hyun-joon. The situation was dangerous, but he could defend himself as the skeleton's movements were predictable, and he was able to pick up on them thanks to his training with Karsago. As he fought off the skeleton's multiple attacks, he realized he had an advantage. Finally, he fended off another attack and struck the skeleton's head with his shield, shattering it into small pieces. Several other skeletons then attacked Sang-chul, but Kang Hyun-joon also handled them. After this amazing battle in which Kang Hyun-joon defeated many monsters, Hyejin was impressed with his feat. However, it turned out that the rest of the group had all died, leaving just the two of them. Worried about how the guy managed to deal with such powerful monsters, Hyejin asked a question, but Kang Hyun-joon replied that it was important that they stayed alive, not to think about how he did it. Although Hyejin had clearly expressed her displeasure with him before entering the dungeon, she was now saying that she regretted parting ways and wouldn't want him to leave her, realizing that she was unlikely to survive without him. But Kang Hyun-joon couldn't make any other choice. He couldn't afford to leave her. They continued deeper into the dungeon and finally reached the mysterious door at the end. Kang Hyun-joon started to open the door, but all Hyejin thought was that he was weak. She felt like she should take his shield away from him so she could provide protection for herself. Her inner fear and desire to survive drove her to use the guy to get out of here alive. Inside the next cave, a green lake spread out, with a bridge spanning the middle of it, leading onward. Hyejin suggested that the guy go ahead, claiming that someone might be waiting for them from behind and that she would watch his back. Inwardly, she planned to use him as bait, hoping someone would jump out of the water at him. Calmly crossing the bridge, the boy gave way to the girl. She thought that she had nothing to worry about since her plan was just to stick by his side until they got out of the cave. She was sure that Kang Hyun-joon was the one who would do anything for her. She decided to leave the rest of her thoughts for later, focusing on getting out of here alive. As the girl was walking across the lake, a shark jumped out of the water and suddenly bit her neck and dragged her into the depths. There was no way to save her, and Kang Hyun-joon realized this as he felt as if someone's voice had possessed him, with his body emitting a light purple glow, a voice that seemed to speak in his place, watching as the girl was swallowed by the shark. Now Hyun-joon was alone, but in a strange way, he stopped feeling regret or fear. With a smile, he pronounced that he couldn't survive here if he was so sensitive. Karsago and Miller had taught him that only the morally strong could withstand this madness. Walking into the next room of the dungeon, the past life that controlled the guy burst out of his body. For a moment, it felt like he was waking up after a long sleep. The surroundings were unfamiliar, and Hyun-joon lost track of Hyejin. Suddenly seized by panic, he started banging on the closed doors. But turning around, he found the skeletons ready to attack him. Grabbing a sword lying on the floor, he was ready to fight to see who would survive. A fierce battle began. He thrashed about, swinging his sword and shielding himself from the attacks. Despite his best efforts, he realized that he was unable to deal with the huge number of monsters. Everyone was dead except for him, a F-rank hunter. He found himself alone with the high-ranked monsters with no way out. The thought popped into his head that he lacked strength. At that moment, he realized that it was with that incredible strength that he would be able to change the situation. Suddenly, Past Life notices Kang Hyun-joon pulling himself down to life, and decides to intervene on his own. Sidon Miller, the last defender of the sword, suddenly gains his body. At this moment, invisible power begins to radiate out from Kang Hyun-joon, causing the monsters to shiver. His eyes begin to glow with a blue glow, and with one powerful blow, he scares the crowd of monsters away. However, after this momentary feat, he falls unconscious. Miller's voice whispers in his ears, promising that their meeting is not over, and that they will cross their paths again. After what happened, Kang Hyun-joon suddenly found himself in the very place where he met Karsago for the first time. He first asked a question about what was happening to him, But Karsago replied that it was important not to ask such questions, but to ask what to do next. The guy's second question was already more proper, and Karsago explained that he needed to become the strongest in this world. However, Kang Hyun-joon doubted again since he was only an F-rank hunter. Karsago instantly tore the sky with his spear and told him about the mana crystal. This crystal was the core of monsters, but in the human world it was used as fuel. But here, reincarnation had implanted it into the troll's body. This became the second training session in which Kang Hyun-joon needed to survive. The troll didn't wait long and attacked, but the guy had a disadvantageous position. The troll began to strike hard. During the battle, Kang Hyun had to die 18 times. In this situation, using the shield required a lot of effort because the troll was much stronger than him, and he also changed the trajectory of the strike every time. Suddenly, under the influence of rage, the shield seemed to catch fire, and jumping with it, Kang Hyun-joon slashed the troll with tremendous force, causing the troll to turn into a lump of coal. Karsago was impressed with the act, noting that in time, Kang Hyun-joon would begin to realize what he was helping him for. Once again plunging into the dark corridors of the dungeon, Kang Hyun-joon once again felt that his body was intact after training. Up ahead, he spotted a mana crystal that could bring a significant reward. However, he needed to get out of this place alive first. The door leading to the boss's room appeared before him. It was clean inside, but a sudden noise heralded the arrival of a huge skeleton champion. Kang Hyun-joon was now certain that the dungeon was much higher level than his rank, and fear overwhelmed him. With shield in hand, he doubted if he could defeat this monster. Then his past life suddenly spoke, urging him not to doubt himself. Kang Hyun-joon should never doubt his strength again. Under Karsago's protection, he flew into the skeleton's attack, but the skeleton fought back. It was obvious that it was pointless to fight close, and he had to keep his distance. The skeleton's attack radius was huge, making it difficult to fight him. With each hit, Kang Hyun-joon's mana was running low, but he dodged well. After the strike, he realized that there was a chance. The shield broke the skeleton's forearm, but that only made the monster even angrier. It continued to attack, getting faster and faster. Gathering all his strength, Kang Hyun-joon thrashed around, entangling the monster, and struck hard with his shield, toppling the skeleton. After a long and arduous battle, he was finally victorious and felt relieved. At this time, a management employee named Park Jung-ho arrived at the entrance to the dungeon. He contacted the manager by phone to report the past 3 days since the dungeon gate was opened. The lack of news of a successful sweep prompted him to speculate that the squad members might not have survived. Therefore, he demanded that a rapid response team be dispatched to prevent the monsters from possibly infiltrating the surface. Meanwhile, a weakened Kang Hyun-joon emerged from the portal. The administrative officer was startled by his appearance and raised his eyebrows as he asked about the whereabouts of the other hunters. The guy sadly replied that all his comrades had died. The receptionist asked for his hunter's ID, and Kang Hyun-joon provided it. Park Jung-ho was surprised to learn that it was an F-rank hunter. With this unexpected information, he rushed to the manager's office. Park Jung-ho literally burst into the office and explained that there might be a hunter capable of reawakening. The manager was dumbfounded as he looked at the picture of Kang Hyun-joon, the only one who had returned alive from the elite B-rank dungeon. But his distrust remained. The hunter looked emaciated, and the manager couldn't understand why the administration officer insisted on waking him up. Further verification was needed to ascertain the validity of this information. The manager had a hard time accepting the thought, but he didn't want to waste time, as even among S-rank hunters, only a few were capable of reawakening themselves. He decided it was easier to comply with the regulations and continue working, not wanting to take responsibility for the unverified words of employee Park Jung-ho. Upon leaving the office, the employee remained in his position. He was still convinced that he was facing a reawakening and decided to act on his own, regardless of the manager's questionable opinion. The scene shifts to the moment when Kang Hyun-joon decided to take some time off and once again found himself in an unknown world. This time, he met another from his past lives. That person was dressed in a white robe with purple trim, from which a purple smoke was wafting. This appearance announced that although Kang Hyun-joon might look weak on the surface, there was a lot of courage lurking in his soul. The reincarnation with glowing violet eyes was named Hasashin. He explained that he had taken the shortest route to meet Kang Hyun-joon to give him knowledge. He warned the guy that the other past lives were also eager to meet him first. But in facing the coming dangers, Kasashin will be able to prove how valuable he is. He will be more useful and important than other past incarnations. Kang Hyun-joon's strength will become the key to his success, but the stronger he is, the more he will do nefarious acts. Evil and insidious forces will hunt him down. An example would be the director of the Shadow Guild, who would perceive his power as a threat. The next day, the scene unfolds at the Mana Crystal Exchange Department. Kang Hyun-joon goes there, ready to exchange his hard-earned crystals. An employee present there offers him a little over 20 million won for all the crystals. He also asks for an appraisal of the value of his shield. However, as there was no appraiser available, he has to wait. He sits down on a bench, waiting for his turn. At this time, an administrative officer named Park Jung approaches him. He has something important to tell Kang Hyun-joon, so he suggests moving to a more private place. In the park where they find themselves, the officer asks the guy some questions that could become clues in the investigation. He records the answers to these questions in a file folder. Afterwards, he hands Kang Hyun-joon his C-rank hunter's license and says that he thinks he's much stronger than it might seem, even though that's all he can do for him. Guy feels joy and gratitude to the staff member for his care and support. At the same time, in the huge skyscraper of the Echo Guild, there came a time when the guild director, who also happened to be acquainted with the departed Hai-jin, began to worry. The girl's disappearance and her inability to answer her phone tense him up. He forces his assistant, Hyun-seok, to investigate the situation in the dungeon where Hee-jin has gone. The assistant accomplishes his task and learns that all the hunters trapped in this dungeon have died. This news infuriates the guild director, Young Sung-min. A surge of nerves pushes one of the staff members to say that there was only one survivor left. The director strongly disliked loss and didn't want to even think that something he belonged to could have been lost. Unwilling to accept the fact that Hai-jin might have died, he spent some time thinking. Eventually, realizing the need for action, the director made a decision. He ordered the last survivor to be brought to him. The day continued for Kang Hyun-joon. In the evening, he met up with his comrade Seok-gu at a cozy restaurant where they enjoyed a delicious meal. Seok-gu congratulated his friend on his new status as a C-rank hunter. Kang Hyun-joon had now become recognized and famous in the dungeon administration. Everyone was talking about the only surviving F-rank hunter in the elite dungeon. But Kang Hyun-joon couldn't understand what was so special about it. Seok-gu told him about another interesting case similar to his. Such cases were extremely rare, and only with hunters who had awakened a second time. The most famous of these cases is the SS-ranked hunter Han Jin-woo. Nowadays, when people hear Asura, they immediately think of the country's supreme guild. But few people know that it was founded by Han Jin-woo, the first and only SSS-ranked hunter in the country, who elevated the guild to high heights. During the conversation, Seok-gu asked if Kang Hyun-joon had been approached by the dungeon administration with a job offer, but the guy said he hadn't heard of such an offer. Afterward, he and his comrade enjoyed their drinks, and Seok-gu shared his opinion that the administration shouldn't treat C-rank hunters so easily. He gave the example of Han Jin-woo, who, after surviving the dungeon, was promoted straight to A rank. With everything Kang Hyun-joon had been through, starting with being an orphan, he felt that the guy deserved to be treated with more respect. So they continued to have a nice time at the restaurant, enjoying the relaxation and friendly conversation. After having a fun day celebrating, Kang Hyun-joon walked Seok-gu to the cab and headed home where he was going to rest. On the way, however, he noticed that two men with obviously bad intentions had been following him for a long time. The purple glow from Hasashin's reincarnation lit up in his eyes, and then the two men approached, demanding that the guy go with them. They threatened to use force, drawing swords from their spatial pockets. However, under the influence of reincarnation, Kang Hyun-joon didn't let himself be intimidated by them. He fought with the criminals. One of them tried to attack him from behind, but the blows went through the guy and he remained unharmed. After several unsuccessful attack attempts, the criminals realized that Kang Hyun-joon was using some special aura. The guy instantly pierced one of the attackers with his arm, emitting a purple glow, and he fell on the ground with no signs of life. Then the second criminal attacked the guy with the sword, but he masterfully dodged as if he was teleporting and ended up behind his attacker's back. He delivered the final blow, and the second culprit fell in front of him, exhausted. Politely asking who sent them after him, Kang Hyun-joon asked them to tell the truth, promising to save their lives. But the guard was stubborn and refused to divulge the information. Nevertheless, the reincarnation of Hasashin never left a trace. After a short struggle, Kang Hyun-joon was left alone. After gathering his strength, he headed back to his home. Standing in front of his apartment door, the guy couldn't understand why he had drunk so much at the party. He even had trouble remembering how he'd gotten home in the first place. However, he was relieved that he was still in one piece. As he leaned back on the bed, he felt tired enough that he couldn't even sort out his thoughts. The next morning, he woke up with a good mood and determination. After making himself some ramen, he relaxed and enjoyed his breakfast. Suddenly, his phone rang, and it turned out to be Seikegu, who brought good news. He had found a group of hunters for him. With his spirits lifted, Kang Hyun-joon ate breakfast and quickly gathered all the things he needed. On the street, he deftly caught a cab, which quietly headed for his place of work. Suddenly, their car was illuminated by the orange light of flames from a fireball that was hurtling towards them. Thanks to his instant reaction, Kang Hyun-joon managed to throw himself out of the car before it collapsed. He found himself in front of an orc warlock, followed by a horde of orcs scattering everything in their path. It was obvious that the gate had been opened. In panic, the humans tried to run away, and Kang Hyun-joon realized that he needed to finish off the orc leader quickly. With a swing, he began to demolish one by one the orcs with his shield, but their numbers did not dwindle. He decided to take a risk and rushed to attack the orc sorcerer, summoning all his strength. He realized that if he didn't interrupt the sorcerer's actions, the situation could get worse. Suddenly, a girl with a saber approached him. She noticed that he wasn't a member of any guild, but his skills were too valuable to be lost in vain. They had little time, so she suggested he join the Ace Guild. She gave him a contact for communication and disappeared. Kang Hyun-joon saw another crowd of people running out of the mall. The need to quickly finish off the orcs prompted the guy to act fearlessly. He realized that although there was a hunter's rule that everyone had to intervene when the gate opened, fighting this horde face-to-face was extremely risky. But he realized that success in this situation would bring him fame and possibly a promotion to A-Rang. Thus, he decided to take up the challenge. Upon entering the mall, Kang Hyun-joon was faced with a devastated and burning place. However, there wasn't a single orc here. This fact made him alert as the situation seemed strange. It was as if someone had carefully gotten rid of all traces. The boy couldn't understand who was capable of such a cruel act. Suddenly, he noticed a wounded hunter, most likely also a victim of an orc attack. The man warned him to leave the place as the situation was extremely dangerous. He emphasized that the opening of the gate this time was different than usual, and it was likely that someone was behind the incident. A crowd of people rushed into the mall. However, Kang Hyun-joon realized that they were not their allies. They refused to answer the guy's questions and went straight to the attack. The wounded man recognized them as the Echo Guild Special Squad. According to him, the men clearly knew who they were. The fighters attacked, but Kang Hyun-joon used his aura, easily dodging the blows, blocking the attacks with his shield, and moving to counterattack. A terrific battle ended, leaving only one man alive. Instead of killing him, the protagonist decided to take him hostage. However, the warrior was not going to give up so easily and attacked him. It was in vain, as Kang Hyun-joon was prepared for such a turn. The wounded man was amazed that Kang Hyun-joon had handled the Special Forces group alone. He expressed his gratitude for the rescue and asked if he was an A-rank hunter. The guy didn't understand the meaning of the question, said his rank, and was about to leave. The man stopped him, telling him that the dungeon cleanup team should have arrived by now. He introduced himself as Kang Taemin and confessed that despite his current appearance, he is the head of the dungeon department, and will make sure that Kang Hyun-joon gets his well-deserved award. Even though Kang Hyun-joon tried to show indifference to the reward offer, he certainly wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. A few days later, he met with Kim Taemin in his office. There, he was given food and a special spatial bag. Kang Hyun-joon was surprised why the Bronze Guild was so generous in giving such a value to an ordinary hunter. The department head then cut to the chase, requesting the help of his guild. He invited the guy to join the Lace Guild. But then Kang Hyun-joon heard the voice of a reincarnation named Ripper. The one asked him to fulfill his request and accept the offer. Kim Taemin then explained that the unofficial war with the Echo Guild would soon become a reality. In unofficial warfare, special forces from both guilds fight each other, but without judges, which allows you to kill your opponents. The boy realized that he was sure to be generously rewarded for this. He realized that accepting the offer was his chance. However, he decided to do a little bidding and get more. He told the department head that although the space bag was good, he would have to put his own life on the line for it. In response, the man offered him a permanent SWAT team that would always be ready to come to his aid. The guy realized that such an offer gave him a huge opportunity and accepted. This was a huge deal for a loser like him. He gladly accepted the offer. After that, he wanted to register in the dungeon to make some money. However, the waiting list for a C-ranked dungeon was extremely long, and the rules prohibited moving to higher-ranked dungeons. Therefore, he resolutely called a girl from the Ace Guild named Choi Yo-seul, who had provided him with her number during the fight with the orcs. They met, and he asked her for information on raid schedules for professional groups. Although the girl thought he had decided to join their guild, she found an alternative option for him to try. Their group was planning a raid to the B-rank dungeon and was heading there as early as tomorrow. The next day, Kang Hyun-joon arrived at the meeting place. There, a car with a private driver pulled up to him, and that's when the guy realized that professional groups work differently. Inside the car was Choi Yo-seul. She was once again annoyingly asking if he wanted to join their guild after such comforts. They headed to the Dungeon Gate location, where they met up with the Ace professional group. The leader was Choi Han-seok, an A-rang hunter with magic skills. It turned out that he was Choi Yo-seul's oppa. After that, Kang Hyun-joon called a guy named Do-sik, who shared that this would be his first B-rank dungeon. Do-sik warned that B-rank and above dungeons were difficult to fight with normal weapons, so he took out a sword from the spatial pocket. It was better than the one he had used before. Now, by teaming up, they could help each other on this difficult journey. Now that everyone was ready, Choi Han-seok gave the final briefing. He explained in detail how the formation should be organized and emphasized that everyone was obliged to follow his orders. In Kang Hyun-joon's case, his role was to guard the rear flank, meaning he acted as a personal guard for Choi Yo-seul. After Choi Han-seok easily opened the gate to the dungeon using his magic power, the hunters set off. Their first task was to mop up this dungeon, and they began to immediately display their strength in front of the spirit realm monsters. The monsters, angered by the invasion, rushed to attack, but to the experienced hunters it was only a form of entertainment. And it was here, in the heat of battle, that Kang Hyun-joon began to truly appreciate his new team. The group of hunters appeared so professional and coordinated that he couldn't help but admire. Yes, they were sure that the dungeon was small and they could handle it without much trouble. But still, there was a boss ahead of them, and they knew it would be a real challenge. Even so, they were determined and confident they could get through it all. There was a sudden silence in the darkness of the dungeon, making Choi Han-seok wary. He warned his team to be vigilant, and it turned out to be a very wise decision. A moment later, the nightmares, horrible creatures filled with aggression and malice, suddenly attacked. The hunters did not waste any time and rushed into battle, repelling the nightmare attacks. Choi Han-seok gathered all of his strength in his hand and unleashed a mighty blow to the ground, causing a blast wave that immediately reduced the number of monsters. At this moment, Kang Hyun-joon realized that his new team were true professionals. They were strong and cohesive, and he couldn't help but admire their strength and experience. Kang Hyun-joon felt his team starting to get tired. He told himself that it would be hard for them to cope without his help. At this moment, Danzig, the essence of his previous life, possessed his body to strengthen his resolve. He decided to take it upon himself to fight the remaining monsters, urging his team to take care of the wounded. It seemed like the battle was nearing its end, but suddenly, the nightmare boss appeared in the dungeon. In the blink of an eye, Kang Hyun-joon sensed his approach and, thanks to his quick reflex, repelled the boss's forceful strike with his shield. But it cost him damage to his left arm. However, Danzig's essence increased his physical abilities and recovery speed. He realized that he couldn't miss this chance and decided to finish the battle. The boss was powerful, but Kang Hyun-joon realized that he needed to stop mining mana crystals and attack the boss's core. It was a bold move that turned out to be the right one, and he defeated the boss. Choi Han-seok was amazed at the guy's strength and determination, not knowing what that strength was. The battle was over, and the hunters began to take care of the wounded. Kang Hyun-joon realized that he had completed his part of the task and didn't want to join the guild. In parting, the team leader told him that he was amazed at his strength and courage. Coming to the end of the day, Kang Hyun-joon eagerly checked his bank account, and what he saw left him in complete shock. As much as 50 million won had been deposited into his account. It was much more than he had expected. After the pleasant news, the boy went to bed tired but satisfied. He sank into sleep, and a marvelous picture appeared before him, a large room in which the last holy sword awaited him. Kang Hyun-joon picked it up and immediately felt its splendor. Then he saw a past life, Sidon Miller, a sword saint, who informed him that Kang Hyun-joon had a sighted eye as a rookie. It seemed familiar to the hero, and he remembered the times Miller had been in his body during that very battle with the skeletons. This time they started practicing aura control. It was difficult, and Sidon Miller decided to help him by pushing him from behind. However, Kang Hyun-joon couldn't hold on to this power, and the room was filled with flashes. The magical resonance was so strong that in reality he would have already died. Nevertheless, the guy decided to try again. Sidon Miller became convinced that other lives were right, and Kang Hyun-joon does indeed have a unique gift. It looks like he might even become a master of wielding sword aura. Reincarnation showed off her incredible skills by demonstrating various sword techniques. Kang Hyun-joon realized that if he could handle Karsago's training, he could definitely handle this one. Finishing the first training session on that note, the reincarnation was amazed at his potential. They agreed to meet the next time the boy was ready. Sidon Miller hoped he would do well this time. The next day, our hero prepares for the onslaught of unofficial guild warfare. It reminds him of the importance of mastering swordsmanship, just like Sidon Miller did. The deadlines are getting tighter and tighter, and in order to be even more fit, he has to spend a lot of time practicing. After a while, the long-awaited day of the unofficial war came. Kang Hyun-joon sat in the car talking to Kim Taemin about their team's strategy and capabilities in this difficult fight. Their group consisted of 2 B-rank hunters and 4 C-rank fighters. Compared to the Echo Guild, based on the intelligence, their chances of victory seemed extremely low. The situation was extremely difficult, and the only hope was to have complete faith in Kang Hyun-joon. Gathering in a prearranged spot near the portal, they were ready to engage in unofficial warfare. When they finally entered through the portal, the real battle began. Kang Hyun-joon entered first, sensing that the enemies were already waiting for them in ambush. Instantly, he killed 2 opponents, displaying his outstanding abilities. As soon as the enemy team members saw his skills, it was clear to them that they were facing a dangerous opponent, and Kim Taemin was sure that this guy would save their guild. Obeying the orders of their bosses, the 2 teams engaged in a fierce clash. After some time of heated combat, our protagonist noticed the boss of the enemy team decides to join the fight. Realizing that winning this fight could decide the outcome of the entire battle, he prepared to fight at full strength. Charging his abilities and preparing for a tough fight, he engaged the enemy commander who stood out among the ordinary soldiers. Kang Hyun-joon began to push back his opponent despite his outstanding skills. But suddenly, a fireball appeared from the side, but the guy dodged it with agility. He also managed to avoid a sudden strike from above, from which his opponent tried to divert his attention by using a fireball. The leader of the Echo Guild offered him to surrender, claiming that their team had already lost. However, Kang Hyun-joon refused. Pushing the boss away with a powerful punch, much to the annoyance of his opponent, he ordered the entire enemy squad to destroy the guy. An army of enemies swarmed around him. His mana was running low, and he began calling out the names of his reincarnations. At first glance, his enemies thought he had lost his mind, but the protagonist had no answer. He begged for help, and it seemed that this was his last chance for salvation. And suddenly it worked. The bloodlust suddenly awakened the Reaper within him, as if activating dark intentions that had been hidden deep before. The Reaper prophesied inside his mind, declaring that even the deepest corners of hell had heard his plea. He then ordered the hero to raise his sword and begin the slaying to see what their final cry of farewell sounded like. His mana had recovered, and he felt it was enough to continue fighting. The smell of blood fueled the Reaper in him, which awakened his killer instinct, making the guy bloodthirsty after years. The Reaper shared with him the enemy's weaknesses, which made the battle much easier. Kang Hyun-joon was defeating his enemies one after another, and at one point he was attacked by an opponent who tried to take his sword away from him with his bare hands. But the guy was able to hold on to his weapon, and after a long fight, there was only one survivor. In an unofficial war between guilds, the battle continues until one side is completely destroyed. The guy should have killed everyone, but he had a moment of humanity left in him, and he didn't want to kill the last survivor. However, reincarnation forced him to go through this ordeal. After the battle was over, Kang Hyun-joon returned through the portal, where Kim Dae-min was already waiting for him. He couldn't believe his eyes. The victory was impressive. He knew that the guy was skilled, but even in his most audacious assumptions, It didn't fit that Kang Hyun-joon could handle all the enemies alone. That was impressive. The boss expressed his deep gratitude to him, and now that the war was over, he transferred the promised reward of 150 million won to Kang Hyun-joon. After all the events, when Kang Hyun-joon was already lying on his bed, he realized that despite the 150 million won he received for participating in the guild war, the price he had to pay in the form of risking his own life was very high. That's why he decided to donate part of this sum to the orphanage. For the sake of this noble cause, he was ready to do even more. At this time, the boss of the Echo Guild, Young Sung-min, receives disturbing information. None of the participants in the unofficial war can be contacted. This greatly alarms him, and he can't understand how this could have happened. Quite strong fighters disappeared all at once. His assistant informs him that according to preliminary reports, their guild was only able to defeat one mercenary from the Lace Guild. To this, the boss orders to find out the name of this mercenary immediately. The next morning, Kang Hyun-joon decided to visit the orphanage, bringing with him many gifts and treats. As soon as he entered the house, his gaze fell on Seo Jin-noon. She was an experienced C-ranked healing huntress that he hadn't seen in a long time. The guy was excited to meet her and immediately asked her about the director of the orphanage. Seo Jin-noon replied that the director was getting old and feeling ill, so she decided to help her at the orphanage. At that moment, the headmistress herself came out and exclaimed that she felt fine and that Seo Jin-noon should be doing her hunting activities instead of helping her at the orphanage. The guy was amazed at how Seo Jin-noon manages to combine working at the orphanage with participating in hunting raids, as both of these activities are very labor-intensive. The headmistress then started scolding the guy for bringing too many gifts, thinking it was unnecessary. In response, the guy explained that he had been promoted to C rank and had received a payout. The headmistress was proud of him, but still expressed her doubts about the dangerous situations he might have gotten himself into. Afterward, he went with his girlfriend to distribute gifts to the children. His grandmother looked at him thoughtfully, not believing how fast time was flying by. He had once been such a little boy, but now he was a real man. As they went outside, they were spotted by children playing in the street, and those children rushed to them for their gifts. It seemed like the children were more excited about the gifts than Kang Hyun-joon himself. The grandmother offered the kids to snack on the pizza that the guy brought. Instantly, they sat down at the table, enjoying the delicious pizza. Suddenly, Hasashin's voice sounded in his mind, warning him that someone was watching him. He quickly shouted for everyone to get under the table, and a moment later a fireball passed over them. Fortunately, this time, no one was hurt. The righteous shield of Karsago protected the protagonist, and the brave blade of Sidon Miller became an inseparable companion in this battle. Even though Seo Jin-noon was a C-ranked huntress with healing magic, Kang Hyun-joon was still the only one who could protect everyone. Suddenly, as many as 20 opponents gathered around the guy, ready to grab him. One of the aggressors approached him, informing him that he had picked the wrong opponent and their boss covets his head. A lowlife like him doesn't realize who he's messing with. After saying that, they rushed to attack. One used acceleration, another threw fireballs, and the third slashed through the air with his sword. But despite their insurances, all their attempts to damage the guy were unsuccessful. However, one of the attackers ordered his men to aim at the girl, and instantly fireballs flew towards her. Kang Hyun-joon couldn't make it to her in time, so he decided on a desperate act. He threw his sword to protect the girl. He was now standing without a shield, and that gave the enemies a small chance. Nevertheless, he managed to repel the attacks of several enemies with his sword. However, his strength was running low, and at that moment, his inner reaper, awakened by bloodlust, intervened. He created an incomprehensible web of black and red color, entangling the enemies in it. With this unexpected help, the guy coped with several more opponents. But his strength was running out, and one of the villains gave him a strong blow. The boy fell down. Seo Jin-noon approached him, starting to treat his wounds, but her healing power wasn't working for some reason. The boy felt the weakness engulfing him, and suddenly everything around him went dark. There was complete silence and absolute darkness. After a moment of darkness, Kang Hyun-joon suddenly found himself in front of the door of the house. A mysterious voice echoed in his ears, urging him to fight and protect those he cared about. The voice warned him against doing things he might regret later. Reincarnation promised to give him the strength he needed for this mission. Kang Hyun-joon entered the house, where his gaze fell on a bearded man standing in the middle of a mountain of corpses. This man, Danzi, had clearly gone through something terrible. He failed to protect those he loved and ended up losing everything. Danzi didn't want Kang Hyun-joon to repeat his fate, so if he could endure the pain and trials that awaited him, Danzi was willing to give him the power to protect everyone he cared about. Kang Hyun-joon confidently stated that it didn't matter to him what trials awaited him in the future. He was willing to go through all the hardships just to save everyone he cared about. In response, Danzi decided to share his own story so that Kang Hyun-joon could get a glimpse into the hell he himself went through. They found themselves in a different world, near a kingdom where Kang Hyun-joon was deprived of the ability to speak, could only observe what was happening around him. Danzig's voice also changed. A little girl in a dress was approaching him with great speed, shining with happiness. She ran to hug him. The girl jumped into his arms and began to hug him. Danzig stroked her head affectionately and called her Little Princess. Next to him stood Anna, his wife. It was they who formed his real family. Suddenly, his comrade named Craig ran up to him and told him the terrible news. The enemies were preparing to invade their kingdom. From that moment on, the real hell began. The scene shifted and Danzig found himself in a grim prison surrounded by the bodies of his dead friends and family. Those he held so dear no longer existed. At that moment, Kang Hyun-joon realized that if he couldn't protect the orphanage, the same fate awaited him. Sure, it's just an image, but this dream left a deep mark on him. Danzig's words sounded grim as he shared with Kang Hyun-joon that his own strength and the hatred he feels inside him is making him stronger right now. The moment had come when it was time to come out and show everyone their true strength. And then, the protagonist felt a huge flash of light inside him, as if his essence had been reborn. Charged with this incredible power, he transformed, acquiring the determination of Danzig, the courage of Sidon Miller's sword, and the bloodthirstiness of Ripper. Kang Hyun-joon turned into a true monster, stunning his enemies and chopping them down with his weapon. He didn't give his opponents a single chance of survival. Even using high-level magic against the guy seemed useless. He was much stronger than the enemy intelligence suggested. Nothing could break him. The last enemy he pierced without mercy. In parting, he warned that his patron would not leave him alone. After a fierce battle, he turned to Nuna and whispered that it was over. As if he had exhausted all his strength, he fell unconscious, completely exhausted. Kang Hyun-joon slowly came to his senses in the hospital, his eyes meeting the gazes of Kim Taemin and Seo Jin-noon. The guild director sincerely apologized for not being able to come to the rescue in time, even though the guy had saved their guild. He assured that the likelihood of more attacks would now be minimal, as most of the guild was assigned to guarding the hospital. The director revealed that during Kang Hyun-joon's blackout, the police were questioning Seo Jin-noon about the hunter's attack. Unfortunately, despite her testimony, no evidence was ever found. Therefore, the guild had to focus on protecting the orphanage and Kang Hyun-joon's family. The grandmother and the children were at the guild office and were completely safe. Guy sincerely thanked the guild director for his concern for his loved ones. It soon became known that there was a spy among the guild. After some time, Kim Taemin was taken to a place where the spy was already detained. The lad begged for mercy, realizing the great mistake, but unfortunately his petition was never accepted. The scene shifts to the moment when the protagonist begins to fall asleep and, as if by magic, finds himself in another world, the world of Hasashin's past life. Kang Hyun-joon asks the reincarnation for power. The reincarnation agrees and promises to teach him an incredible technique, the art of hiding in dense darkness, both his body and his presence. The guy can barely believe that such a technique is possible. Even some S-rank hunters, in his opinion, are not capable of such a thing. However, Kasashin asks not to be compared to these scum. He claims that he has a special talent. That's why they start their studies right away. The first lesson is the technique that reincarnation wishes to impart. It is based on the use of magic, or in other words, the hiding behind the curtain effect. But like most high-ranking techniques, it requires a huge mana expenditure. The lesson is that the guy has to plunge into total darkness and become one with it. A must if Kang Hyun-joon wants to master this magic. However, there is a risk of losing your mind being in such dense darkness. But that doesn't stop our hero, and they start the lesson. Suddenly, all around him, there was pitch-black darkness. At first, this task seemed nothing special, but soon the protagonist realized that being in absolute darkness for too long could destroy the mind. He looked around, but saw nothing, and didn't know how much time had passed, or when it would end. Panic gripped him. He didn't understand why he was here and started screaming hysterically, demanding to be let out. Only one thought remained in his mind. How much longer? How much longer? When will it end? By all appearances, he was already beginning to prepare for the end. And so he saw ghostly copies of himself appearing around him, who began to mock him. They said he was weak, weaker than a piece of paper, and demanded his soul. Despite his desire to gain strength to protect his family, he still seemed defenseless to them. They claimed that this was his true nature. Suddenly, however, Kasashin appeared and noticed that he looked too vulnerable. Hasashin decided to help by sending him ghosts. After that, the reincarnation gave Kang Hyun-joon congratulations, and said that he had mastered one of Hasashin's hidden techniques that would make others tremble in fear. Then it was time to say goodbye. Kang Hyun-joon suddenly woke up screaming as if he was having a terrible nightmare. He was greatly surprised that it seemed like only a day had passed, but his sense told him that a whole year had passed. At that time, Kim Taemin walked into his room, and he informed the guy that they had taken care of the spy. When the guy found out what the Echo Guild was doing at the moment, his interest was immediately piqued. It turned out that they were preparing for a second attack. At that moment, Kang Hyun-joon got up from his bunk and said that he wasn't going to just sit idly by. He resolutely announced his intention to attack the enemy's main office. It was certainly a bold move, but the guy was full of energy and determination. After a while, our protagonist makes it to the enemy's office. At that moment, he activates his new ruthless ability, Hasashin's darkness. As this darkness enveloped him, it was as if he was becoming invisible, like a ghost. The boy was determined and sure that today would be the last day of the Echo. 2 guards are noticeable at the entrance to the building. One of them seems lost in futile musings. The second guard grudgingly admonishes him, urging him to forget unnecessary thoughts and focus on his work. The first guard, however, continues to hesitate. Suddenly, the blade strikes and the first guard falls silent. His partner doesn't realize who is attacking and only sees the shadow of the attacker. By the time the second guard realizes what has happened, it's too late. The protagonist, Kang Hyun-joon, by hiding his presence in a curtain of darkness, shows how effectively he can remain undetected, even at the slightest shadow. He manages to overcome obstacles easily and effortlessly, hoping that his entire journey will be just as successful. The boy perseveres through the corridors of the building, assiduously replaying in his mind Kim Taemin's words about the night guards who happen to be an integral part of their secret defenses. Perhaps that means he can act without any restraining force since they dared to attack his family. Determined to slay anyone who dared to raise a hand against his loved ones, Kang Hyun-joon realized that training at Hasashin's place would come in handy. He knew that the key to victory was a winning stance, and thanks to his training with Master Hasashin, he could best utilize the advantage of darkness. With a determined move, he finds the electrical room and easily disables it. Suddenly, darkness envelops the building and electricity is lost everywhere. Now that his enemies are in complete disarray, he is ready to move on to his goal. Inside the building, anxious speculation began among its employees. Some speculated that some intruder had gotten inside, causing unprecedented anxiety. At the same time, others were so confident in the inviolability of the Great Echo Guild that they couldn't even believe that someone would dare to invade their sacred halls. However, not everyone on this floor was already alive. Kang Hyun-joon eliminated everyone in his way with lightning speed and slowly but surely approached the office on the 4th floor where the Echo Guild director was currently trying to solve a mystery related to electricity. The boss tried to appease his employees and fix the problem as soon as possible, but the situation was becoming increasingly strange. The light did not disappear in the neighboring streets, and the lower floors of the building became suspiciously quiet. Young Sung-min sensed that something was wrong and ordered his staff to arm themselves, realizing that they might be targeted. He was right, for Kang Hyun-joon was already close behind. The protagonist, using his stealthy technique, began to attack the guild guards. The 2 C-ranked hunters quickly found themselves on the path of destruction, with no chance of survival. The guards, realizing that their adversary was able to conceal his presence, tried to turn on the lights in their hands, but it proved to be a futile effort. Young Sung-min was in a stupor. It didn't even occur to him that someone with such skills could sneak in. In his eyes, it was a completely meaningless action. Kang Hyun-joon, not wanting to deal with the annoying mage hunters anymore, continued to neutralize anyone who got in his way. Guild guards were restlessly trying to restore light, launching light drones into the air to provide some visibility. But their efforts were in vain as Kang Hyun-joon was swift and ruthless. In time, there was only one guild boss left, who was on the verge of hysteria. It was hard for the guild boss to figure out what rank the mysterious opponent had, but he felt that Kang Hyun-joon had incredible abilities. He started screaming and swinging his sword in a desperate attempt to get the guy to come out of hiding. Kang Hyun-joon came out from under the invisibility and started talking to Jung Sung-min, asking if the latter thought he could harm his family and stay alive. The boss tried to reply, but the words were stuck in his throat. The guy gave him one last chance to speak, and he squeezed out a sentence. "Is that you, Kang Hyun-joon?" The guy wondered how the guild boss knew his name. He said that he was the one who killed Hae-jin when Guy was in the dungeon with her. The main character doesn't know what kind of nonsense Jung Sung-min is talking about. At that moment, Kang Hyun-joon remembered that it was Jung Sung-min who brought Hae-jin in his car to the restaurant, where they met Kang Hyun-joon at the beginning of the story. But the boy wasn't here to argue about the past. His goal was to avenge his family, whom the guild leader of the Echo Guild had sent hunters to hunt. The boss wasn't going to give up. He was sure that Kang Hyun-joon was S rank, but even against him he was willing to fight, condemning the guy for the many murders he had committed for the sake of some orphanage. Jung Sung-min started attacking the guy despite all his words and warnings. The protagonist suddenly realizes that most likely the attack on the orphanage was due to him personally, and not an official guild war. This realization becomes the catalyst for his determination. He activates his powers, including Karsago's protective shield, Sidon Miller's daring blade, and the power of Ripper's bloodthirsty essence. With the realization that while he remains their target, his inaction puts his family in jeopardy. He has no choice and decides to enter the fray, facing the man who stands in his family's way. However, Jung Sung-min immediately notices that Kang Hyun-joon is activating his aura, and he is amazed by it. After all, he was promoted from rank F to C not too long ago, and it's surprising. Kang Hyun-joon rebukes him because Hae-jin was just like him, always talking only about ranks. He then adds that he can't even beat a C-rank hunter. However, the boss assures the guy that he is underestimating him. With those words, he activates his flame fever as an A-rank hunter. But Kang Hyun-joon looks at this as a pitiful sight. Even though Jung Sung-min is an A-rank hunter, he easily dispels his abilities in one fell swoop.